Welcome, everyone. In this video, I'll be interviewing Dr. Matt Deaton, a professor of philosophy and an absolute mainstay and linchpin in the Ethics Bowl community. Dr. Deaton was the outreach director for the National High School Ethics Bowl in 2010 and has played a role in Ethics Bowl ever since. He has just published a fantastic new book about the bowl. It's called Ethics Bowl to the Rescue: Saving Democracy by Transforming Debate. In it, he introduces the Ethics Bowl, describes how it's so different to competitive debating and why he thinks that's really valuable, goes on to explain how cases work and how you might approach them, talks about some of the benefits that Ethics Bowl brings to test scores, and then gets into some really thorny ethical issues about the role of AI in helping students prepare for these competitions, about the role of Ethics Bowl in prisons, and of course, whether or not we should make Ethics Bowl mandatory in schools. In our conversation, we cover some of this ground, but we also talk about the role of religious reasoning in public ethical discourse, how much we should be thinking about meta-ethical questions, and then we actually go through, read and analyze a case all about a professor who uses artificial intelligence, even when he's demanded that his students don't do so. Please follow and subscribe if you're interested in more Ethics Bowl related content, and follow the links in the bio if you want to come to online Ethics Olympiad or TKEthics invitational events, of which we hold many throughout the year. As always, if you're interested in training, learning philosophy, or having philosophy seminars at your school, please reach out to me through the links in the bio. Okay, let's get straight into it. Thank you again so much for joining us. We just said a hello off air, but it's really good to have you here. We've known each other for a few years now, I think, through the Australian Ethics Olympiad competition. But for anyone who doesn't know you, do you want to start by just introducing yourself and maybe how you actually ended up interested in philosophy in the first place?
Yeah, I'm Dr. Matt Deaton. I've been involved in ethics bowls and ethics Olympiads since around 2010. I was a graduate student at the University of Tennessee, went to an Association for Practical and Professional Ethics annual meeting, and I attended a pre-college philosophy interest meeting hosted by Roberta Israelov of the Squire Family Foundation. And she pitched the idea that ethics bowls could be a great way to spread the benefits of academic philosophy beyond academia. And I was sold, and happened to be traveling with a department head at the University of Tennessee at the time, John Hardwig. And I said, "Hey, John, I'm happy to put in the legwork and organize this if you will fund it." And he said, "Okay." And it wound up being pretty cheap anyway. Just buy some trophies and some food for the teams. But yeah, after that, went on to become the director of outreach, original director of outreach for the National High School Ethics Bowl. Finished up my doctorate in social and political philosophy and applied ethics at UT, moved to Washington, D.C. for some full-time work with the feds. But while I was there, did some additional work with the Squire Family Foundation and co-founded the D.C. area High School Ethics Bowl. And then I worked with the National High School Ethics Bowl to support and recruit new organizers all over the country. And through that process, I got to meet one of your mentors, Matthew Wills, with Ethics Olympiad in Australia, and started making some international friends. I was so proud to see Matthew go back to Australia and really expand and grow Ethics Olympiad, which is just a Zoom-based version of the Ethics Bowl, which in many cases are in person. But yeah, that's my general background and the way I initially got into Ethics Bowl / Ethics Olympiad.
Fantastic. What about philosophy itself? Did you study philosophy in high school? Was that?
No, no, not at all. That's why I was so interested in the pre-college philosophy interest meeting at that APPE
Right.
meeting. I'm from East Tennessee, about an hour south of Knoxville, and
Mhm.
they may teach philosophy in some of the private schools, but in public schools they don't teach it at all. And the circles that I ran in, folks just weren't familiar. And being in my mid-20s, after a stint in the U.S. Air Force, having run a small business, worked some blue-collar jobs, finally decided to do what my dad had been telling me to do for years and go to college. And I started out pre-med. I thought I was going to be an orthopedic surgeon, but I was the president of my community college's biology club, and all that sounded pretty cool and neat. But I took an intro to philosophy class, and I couldn't believe that people had been thinking about these interesting, difficult, abstract ideas and questions that I'd been thinking about for hundreds of years. And that there was this huge canon of progress that had been made, and I didn't have to figure it out all out of my own. I could stand on the shoulders of giants and then learn from them. But philosophers don't make any money, and doctors make all the money. So I continued on the pre-med path, but then I took another philosophy class, which was critical thinking. And I was
Mhm.
introduced to the reasoning fallacies, how to diagram arguments, how to analyze them, repair them. And suddenly I could see more clearly how I had been manipulated by advertisers and politicians and various talking heads. And I really enjoyed those insights, being able to see through those manipulations. And so decided, this is for me. I can't believe people do this for a living. I can't believe that it's an actual discipline, but hey, let's run with it. So after some good conversations with my wife, we decided to change paths, and then 10 years later, had a doctorate in it, and was on the Ethics Bowl promotion track as well.
That's fantastic. That's so cool. Oh my gosh. So yeah, let's maybe we should give a little overview for the Ethics Bowl. You and I know it very well. You've been in it. What was the first year you started?
2010.
2010. Yeah. So a good long while. But for anyone who really doesn't know anything about the Ethics Bowl, do you want to give a little overview?
Yeah. It's a variant of debate, but it's very different from traditional debate. Traditional debate, the teams are told, Team A, you're for it, Team B, you're against it. Now battle with each other. Don't concede any points. Use whatever manipulative technique that you're able to use, whatever rhetorical device that you can use. Never admit whenever the other team may have made a good point. By all means, never change your position. And so the position that you're assigned is based on a coin flip, and it teaches participants really to just be passive receivers of moral and political truth from authorities, and to also defend whatever those truths are at all costs, and to not collaborate, not to cooperate, but instead compete. Ethics Bowl, on the other hand, provides a case set of a dozen to 15 cases several months before the competition, and the topics could range from interpersonal issues, whether or not you should tell your roommate that you found out that their boyfriend was previously married, to all sorts of weird stuff in the real world politics, including whether prisoners should be allowed to trade organ donations for reduced prison sentences. And the teams are asked, what do you really think is the best answer? How should these cases really be decided? Should this law be passed to allow sentences to be reduced? Should this person actually tell their roommate? And when they come to the actual competition during the round, they're not told what to think. They're judged based on the quality of their reasons. They're also judged based on whether or not they've thoroughly considered all the morally relevant dimensions, if they've figured out the values and intention, if they've arrived at a very quick snap judgment and they're eager to defend something that they're completely sure is the truth, or if they can demonstrate that they've really thought it through carefully. It also asks teams to proactively consider an objection. How might a reasonable person disagree with you? And to proactively respond to that reasonable objection during your initial presentation. And when the other team comments on the first team's presentation, they're not required to disagree. Now, they need to add something meaningful to the discussion. It's never going to be the case that two teams will be completely on the same page. And so it would be lazy and disingenuous to say, "Yay, good job, that's perfect." It's never perfect. But they're not required to attack. They're not required to demean. They're not required to show that their position is necessarily superior and the other team's position is ridiculous, as you would typically see in traditional debate. But they add to the conversation. And then whenever the other team responds, the same thing. It's cordial, it's collaborative. The idea is to expand everyone's understanding on the issues. And the purpose of Ethics Bowl, it's to develop individual character and to improve individual moral decision making, but also to elevate democratic norms. Folks who are paying attention to democracies all over the world, they're sliding towards authoritarianism. They're becoming more divided internally. The causes of this are multifaceted, but Ethics Bowl and a transition away from traditional debate toward Ethics Bowl and Ethics Olympiad could help resolve this somewhat. It's not a silver bullet, it's not a quick fix, but it could definitely help. And that's one reason a lot of people are promoting Ethics Bowl.
Yeah. So I'll do an introduction before the interview and tell people all about your new book, Ethics Bowl to the Rescue, Saving Democracy by Transforming Debate. So obviously, this piece about saving democracy you think is really critical. What is it about modern democracy that you think requires a new form of discourse? What's gone wrong?
Well, I mean, if you took a look at the historical causes, I mean, it's been in the United States, you've had, of course, the two-party system, and you've had the accelerating attacks, the accelerating divisiveness, the lack of civility, and some people trace this back to the advent of talk radio, the repeal of the fairness doctrine, which used to require whenever television or radio stations would provide a particular political view, they would be required to provide an alternate view. Apparently, a president in the early 80s repealed that through the Communications Commission, FCC, and that allowed different radio talk show hosts in particular to come out and just pitch one particular angle and to do it in an entertaining way, but also a very aggressive, combative, inflammatory way. And so that drove some of the divisions. And of course, you had responses for folks on the other side. And so they became more and more divided. And then you had the advent, of course, of social media, and you have algorithms in social media, which are designed to draw us in and keep us scrolling, to keep us liking, to keep us looking. And the companies found out pretty quick that angry, scared users are more engaged users. And so these algorithms are largely, not necessarily by design to make us divided, to make us fearful and make us angry at one another, but just by virtue of their business model. Because the more engagement you have, the more that they can charge for their advertisements. The social media algorithms are going to show us memes, and they're going to show us posts that are in many cases going to make us mad and make us fearful. And oftentimes that's going to be driven by political divisions. And so it's going to reward people that are more and more inflammatory. And so that's one of the causes as well. Also in the United States, of course, the country has went through some pretty substantial demographic changes. Traditionally, folks that look like me have run the country, and we're no longer the ethnic majority. And there have been a lot of other folks that have very rightly come to positions of power and have demanded equal treatment and have demanded equal access. And there's been a backlash to that. There's a backlash during President Obama's administration, and then the pendulum swings in different directions. But it's swinging in a more and more increasingly violent direction. There's an increase in political violence in the United States, and people from opposing viewpoints typically don't talk to one another in a collegial fashion. And traditional debate, while it isn't the primary cause of this, it certainly facilitates it and it perpetuates it. Ethics Bowl, on the other hand, to the extent that we can transition from traditional debate over toward the Ethics Bowl model, will teach future leaders how to think through difficult moral and political issues in good faith with people who disagree with them. It teaches them right there while they're with their teams and they're with their coaches to proactively think, how could a reasonable person who is a morally good person disagree with me? And that habit and that practice, I think, and a lot of people think, is going to cultivate far more collegial and civil, solution-oriented and peaceful citizenry, which could also lead us towards more justice and more civic virtue in general.
Yeah. I had a conversation with someone the other day where I was explaining what I do and run these types of competitions myself and do philosophy. And they got quite heated and raised this objection to philosophy as a discipline in general, which was they thought that the image of like an armchair philosopher thinking about the problems of the world, doing nothing about it. And then the more you sort of trouble through these ideas and try to respect both sides, you end up in sort of an apathetic, centrist kind of environment, and you never do anything. You don't make change. Like real change makers are people who are quite fierce and radical in their views. What do you think about that?
I think there's a place for more powerful advocacy. I don't think it's the case that everyone should become an armchair philosopher, and I don't think Ethics Bowl suggests that people should just fall back into a passive perspective and not be advocates. What Ethics Bowl does and what academic philosophy does is it helps us think through these issues in a humble way, in a clear-headed way that truly does look for the best solutions. And so sometimes that can lead to ambivalence. Sometimes that can lead to an indecision, a reluctance to choose a side, a reluctance to actually promote a particular position. That is certainly a risk. But Ethics Bowl is applied ethics, and it asks teams before they come to the competition to come to a consensus on what they actually think about all these different difficult issues. And it asks them to present that position and to defend it. They're in principle willing to change their mind if given good reason to do so, but they're also told, well, you've thought about this for several months. You have some good ideas. Please share those ideas, and perhaps the other team will agree with you. And if they do, maybe that's what the best position is. If they don't, we'll figure it out by going back and forth. So I think studying philosophy and folks that do fall back into that I'm just going to think about it further and I'm not so sure. If the whole world were that way, that would be a bad thing. We need people to be not necessarily aggressive proponents, but you need folks to actually go out there and be powerful advocates. I'm not against that at all. But Ethics Bowl fills that gap of not having a forum, not having a way to teach young leaders how to first think those things through. Because I don't think we can just sit back and receive the truth from our political leaders, because in many cases they're just attempting to acquire additional power and they're not interested in the moral truth. I spent some time on Capitol Hill working with the Congressional Research Service whenever I worked with the feds, and I was disheartened to find in person right there in Washington, D.C., that folks from different sides of the aisle don't talk about the issues for whatever naive reason. Even in my mid 30s, I thought there's got to be a time where they actually come together and talk about the issue. By the time they get there, the vast majority have already made up their mind, and they believe that their job is to simply win. Their job is to
Mm.
simply manipulate the other side, keep their constituencies pacified, look good on television so they can get reelected. But in terms of actually figuring out what's best for the country, what's most just, most of them aren't really open to changing their mind. I found this out by working on the issue of mass shootings. And I found that you had on the one side the National Rifle Association, on the other side you had the Brady Center Against Gun Violence. Me, as a solution-oriented philosopher, I wanted to figure out what would be the best policy, the most just policy. But visiting NRA headquarters and reading stuff from the Brady Center, they weren't interested in solutions. They were interested in simply pushing what they thought was best. And again, there's a place for that. But Ethics Bowl's role in philosophical ethics' role is to help elevate that thought process, elevate the discussion. And I don't think Ethics Bowl itself is vulnerable to the criticism that's going to encourage people that already possess the moral truth to just keep it to themselves. It's going to help people better figure out what that is. And by working through those issues in good faith, perhaps they'll encourage folks on the other side traditionally to do the same thing. That's my hope and my belief as well.
Very good. Okay, let's move on. So in this book, you quote me a few times, and thank you so much for doing so. And
Yeah,
in the
man. Thank
section,
you.
yeah, of course, of course. I'm glad to have contributed. When I read through the book and found that quote with your handwritten annotation on it, I was like thinking to myself, oh, yes, when exactly did I say that? Went and checked my, oh yeah, I guess I did write exactly that, I'm not
Probably
sure.
5 years ago. I worked on the book for a while, so thank you for the quote.
No, of course, of course. So this was a discussion about what role religion and religious reasoning and even religious schools play in the ethics bowl, because we know religious schools compete in the ethics bowl all over the country, and I guess have done from the very beginning in Australia. Like I mean, it must be half of the schools are either Catholic, Anglican, Jewish, like a wide range. And when
Right.
I've talked to Matthew Wills about this, he is of the firm opinion, as best I understand it. Of course, I'll probably interview him as well to get his view. But that religious reasoning is perfectly welcome. And I've been really trying to consider this. And I know we had a bit of an exchange. What do you do when someone's foundational ethical reasoning comes from a God, a transcendent God, which requires a leap of faith to believe in the first place, and not everyone shares the belief in this same God or the same book? Can you have an ethical conversation between those people, between a theist and an atheist, say, that's still productive? How would you go about doing it? And what do you think the rules should be in an ethics Olympiad? Should there be rules that address this particular concern?
Yeah, I think that folks from different religious traditions or a lack of a tradition, religious tradition, can have very productive conversations on most any issue. I wrote a book a few years ago called Abortion Ethics in a Nutshell. And the abortion issue in the United States, I know it's not quite as big of an issue in Australia and other places, but in the United States, it's often driven by a religious perspective, the anti-abortion or pro-life perspective. Well, in the book, it's called A Pro-Both Tour of the Moral Arguments. I present powerful arguments from other philosophers. I didn't come up with too much of my own. I just, organized and summarized what others had argued. There are fantastic arguments from both sides of the traditional debate that have no scriptural references whatsoever. They speak to human autonomy. They speak to the value of human life. They speak to rational consistency, and they make very good points. People oftentimes assume that to think through abortion, to defend it from a pro-life position, it has to have a religious grounding, but that's not true at all. And for that issue, to be able to think it through from a public perspective, I think that's a pretty firm confirmation that you don't have to reference scripture. So actually referencing scripture during an ethics bowl competition, I don't think would be terribly helpful because you're not necessarily going to be competing against or collaborating with members of the same religious tradition. And so if you cite the Quran, for example, to defend a particular position on capital punishment, but the other team and the judges aren't Muslim, well, they can respect that scripture, that Muslim scripture, insofar as they respect you and they respect the tradition generally, but it's not going to have any rational appeal to them as another person, as another moral reasoner. And I don't think there's any reason why you would have to cite the Quran, because there are plenty of good arguments from both angles on capital punishment that are completely secular and they don't reference religious traditions. I've also argued, and I think it's the case, that it's somewhat disrespectful to defend a view on, especially an issue that has political import, that could have some influence on the law, to support it, to defend it, to attempt to enforce it on others when you can only defend it from a private religious perspective. If you can only defend it from a private religious perspective, that means you don't have a public argument that could appeal to anyone to defend it. And you also know that others out there don't share your religious views, which are, as you said before, based ultimately on a leap of faith. There are lots of good philosophical arguments to support the existence of a deity, but connecting those to a particular religious tradition is always difficult. So I always have an element of faith in there. And so if you know in your heart that others don't share the same belief, and you know in your heart that this belief is based on a leap of faith, I think you should have some humility and some reluctance to enforce those beliefs through the law, through the coercive arm of the state, onto other citizens. Having mutual respect for other citizens as citizens would require some restraint. If you yourself wanted to still follow the commandments of a particular faith, that's completely fine, so long as it doesn't impact others. But if you're attempting to enforce it on through the state, I think there's something wrong with that. And in an ethics bowl, or just in public discourse in general, all those norms are still in play. I mean, if you're at your synagogue and you're talking about a particular issue with other Jews, okay, cool. You can just simply quote the Torah. But if you go out into public and now you're making a case about a particular issue as a matter of showing your fellow citizens the respect that they deserve, and probably the exact same respect that your religious tradition would say that people deserve, you're going to need to make a public argument and cite public reasons. Or at least those are my tentative thoughts on it. As always, I'm open to changing my mind. But what's your reaction to those thoughts, Archie?
I think I like it. I mean, maybe I wonder whether you can always turn a religious argument into a somewhat secular one, if that's even the right term. So if we take an example from our TKEthics case set coming up, we've got the paid surrogacy case, which I think came from the Ethics Cup originally. The first line of the case is Pope Francis came out and said that paid surrogacy is a violation to the dignity of women. So the idea that a woman can be paid to give up her uterus for 9 months to have another couple's baby and then hand over the baby at the end of it is a violation of her dignity. Now, obviously, Pope Francis comes at that from a religious perspective, and he would probably say that something about God's natural law and just the nature of having a child is so imbued in something God-given, I suppose, that means that violating that natural process is fundamentally wrong. So I wonder whether you can just, I mean, if you want to make that argument, you can just use natural rights language and like maybe a Kantian perspective coming at it from the idea of
Yeah.
just converting all of your religious ideas into somewhat secular ones, even if they're fundamentally grounded in Christianity, let's say.
Yeah,
Is that the answer?
and human dignity. I mean, you don't have to have a scriptural reference. You don't have to say it's tied to a particular religious tradition. You could just say it's tied to the woman's bodily autonomy as a rational entity with certain capacities. They're the only gender or sex that can recreate or reproduce human life. They're essential for the perpetuation of society, and their value is somehow undermined whenever it's commercialized in this way. And so I've not read the entire proclamation, but from what I know of, and I'm not Catholic, but from what I know of Pope's proclamations, they oftentimes use many public reasons to supplement and to complement their scriptural references. It's not just simply here's where it says in this particular chapter in the New Testament where you should do this. It'll cite scripture for sure, but then also there's a whole lot of bolstering with reasons that anyone should be able to appreciate, regardless of their faith, tradition, or lack thereof. And so that's actually a good example of how you can and should make those sorts of arguments to appeal to anyone out of respect for them. There's a guy named Robert Audi. He's a Christian philosopher who made an interesting argument a few years ago that the golden rule requires that you use public reasons. And what he argued was that if you imagine yourself being a religious minority somewhere, and you imagine having laws forced upon you that are only justified from the perspective of someone else's religion, and they're not being justified from a public perspective, you wouldn't like that. You would feel resentment towards those who are forcing that upon you because they know you don't share their faith convictions. And so, therefore, treating others the way that you would like to be treated requires that you think through difficult political and moral issues from a public perspective, and then refrain from forcing policies on others that can't be reasonably defended from a public perspective.
Mm.
And of course, you can defend the golden rule from many different angles. It's embedded in many different religious traditions. You can defend it from a secular perspective, just as a matter of rational consistency. But Audi's making that appeal specifically to Christians. That if you think loving your neighbor the way that you love yourself, treating others the way you would like to be treated, is foundational to Christ's teachings, then that would require thinking through, especially issues that have political import from a public perspective.
Okay, I really like it. Let me ask about metaethics now. So this is going to get, I think, pretty into the weeds. There was another interview you just did that was fantastic, that sort of
Thank you.
doesn't even like a pretty nice overview of the competition and some more introductory questions about this. I'm assuming that my audience is going to be more like they probably have done the ethics bowl before. They're interested in this kind of stuff. They're probably already thinking a little bit about metaethics. I think we can go here. If I
Okay.
could give a very brief introduction to say that, and you can tell me whether you agree with this, but in the study of ethics, there are sort of three levels to it. And at the bottom level, the most applied level, you have applied ethics, which is what we do in the ethics bowl. We think about real ethical cases and we try to answer them and puzzle through all the implications and figure out what we should do. At the slightly higher level, there's normative ethical theories or normative ethics, where we're thinking about what in principle makes actions right or wrong. And here you have broad categories like consequentialism, where you think that the consequences are what makes an action right or wrong. You have deontology, which is about principles or duties or responsibilities. And then you have virtue ethics, which is a whole different kettle of fish, where you're thinking about the development of character traits that are virtuous. Then at the highest level, there's the question about what we're doing whenever we make an ethical claim at all. So when I say, murder is wrong, what am I really doing with my language? Is it referring to some objective moral fact in the world, like some, written list or criteria that actually exists? That would be like some sort of realist view. Am I referring to a command from God? That'd be a divine command theorist view. Or am I just expressing an emotional state that I have about this topic? And basically I'm saying, oh, murder, ooh, or like murder, gross. That's the meta-ethical question. So this is what I want to raise with you. This normally isn't something that comes up in Olympiads. And I think I maybe have heard you say when you come to an Olympiad round, you can't come as I think, have you said, not, don't come as a nihilist? You have to sort of believe that some moral claims are
Yeah.
true
Yeah.
in order to start the conversation. But I wonder if you zoom out from the ethics bowl, what do you actually think about this topic? And then I suppose, how would you think about it in the context of an ethics bowl?
Yeah, that's definitely true that if you come to an ethics Olympiad or an ethics bowl, you can't just be a nihilist. You have to agree that at the very least, there are better and worse moral views and better and worse moral arguments. And I think that proves itself over the course of a season as teams consider different arguments and they consider different reasons in favor and against different perspectives and views. And if there weren't some objective standard that existed beyond us, then I'm not sure how teams could make any progress as they prepare for the competition. I'm not sure what the judges would be judging as they decide which team has made a better argument. I'm not sure how productive conversation could work if it weren't the case that there were objective standards beyond us. Morality, it can't just be an expression of just a personal belief. I don't think anyone seriously believes that. I mean, I make the basic argument in my ethics in a nutshell. It's just an ethics primer that if you're a moral relativist and you think that morality just turns on what an individual believes, then you would have to endorse the terrible moral perspective and ethical practices of evil Johnny. And any evil Johnny likes to kidnap people and put them in his basement and torture them by making them watch The Masked Singer, a terrible a terrible reality show that here in the United States. It's awful. Never watch it. But evil Johnny does this. And so you might say, well, if Johnny does this and he really thinks it's okay for him to do this, and it really is okay for him. But imagine that Johnny kidnaps you and puts you in his basement and he makes you watch The Masked Singer. He doesn't let you go. Would you simply say, Johnny, I don't like this very much, or Johnny, I really want you to let me go? Or would you say, this is unethical, this is unjust, this is immoral. And if you say any of those things, well, you can't be a nihilist, you can't be a relativist or a subjectivist. You have to be implicitly committed to objective moral standards. Now, the source of those objective moral standards, we don't have to pin down in order to consider morality to be something that's real. All we have to do is say, well, it looks like that there is some standard that's beyond my individual perspective. It's not just up in the air for anyone to pick and choose. We're not nihilists. But we don't have to say it's grounded in evolution or it's grounded in theology or it's grounded anywhere. It's enough to say, look, I have this innate moral sense and I can tell that certain actions are clearly unethical. They're clearly wrong. And whenever I discuss ethics and morals with others, some reasons seem to have more appeal than other reasons. And through discussion, we seem to make progress. And sometimes we'll regress and then we'll progress, we'll change our views, we'll modify them. We'll take a look at different issues, different cases, different arguments, and we'll contrast them with our considered convictions, with our foundational moral intuitions. And then we'll strive for consistency across our views. And we find that on this view over here, we think that personal liberty means a whole lot. In this case over here, this issue over here seems to be similar. And so we'll also apply personal liberty consistently over here. And our moral intuitions on this case seem to inform us over here as well. And we make arguments by analogy, and we treat like cases alike. And so together we figure out what sorts of reasons mean more, which arguments are more or less appealing. And all of this suggests that there really are better and worse answers. And there really is, I'm reluctant to say an objective truth, because then you want to say, well, what does it correspond to in reality? If you have the correspondence theory of truth, it's just a claim that corresponds to something else. And I have to admit that in many cases, what the best objective answer is unclear. But that doesn't mean that it's not out there, and it doesn't mean it's not worth pursuing. You don't take an immediate leap from there are better and worse answers, and there does seem to be a moral truth that's beyond us. You don't leap from that realization to moral arrogance. You don't leap from that to say, well, I've got it all figured out. Here are the answers. Instead, it continues to be a process. I know that's not a perfect answer, but I hope that helps fill in a little bit of what you were asking about. And what are your thoughts on that? Do you think that's a plausible response, or do you think that's not so plausible?
I like it. I haven't studied these like arguments in depth for a long time now. I haven't been in a metaethics class for a while. And I remember being in those classes and like taking any of these views, just like you're saying, you take a view that you think you have, and then you start testing it against many like cases. And it seems like any view that I had at any given time would be have the capacity to be challenged in a way that I didn't know how to respond to. And include like for the question of metaethics, whether there are objective truths, there are all of these intricate arguments about what it implies if you're saying there is or there isn't, that I can't wrap my head around. And so,
Yeah,
but if I,
that's not my specialty either. So
no, okay.
it's an unsatisfactory answer, but
It is, but it makes sense. And I think in terms of a way to move forward, I really like it. And I think the fact that human beings have values, and more often than not, you're talking to someone who has values, and an ethical conversation will be some sort of compromise between facts and values that you both share. It's pretty infrequent that you share no values with another person. Like almost everyone believes that happiness is better than suffering, and
yeah, of course.
all these
Yeah.
basics.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and it transcends culture, and it transcends time, it transcends
Mm.
location. And the dominant ethical theories you mentioned, deontology, utilitarianism, virtue ethics, they're grounded out in common sense morality that we all take for granted. I mean, utilitarianism, you should maximize net pleasure. Well, that's based on the assumption that it's better to promote pleasure and pain, and that the consequences of our actions have some bearing on the morality of our actions. Who would deny that? Kantianism, you should treat persons with respect and never as mere tools, and you should only do things that you should be able to universalize. Well, this rational consistency that seems to be on par with treating like cases alike, which seems to be a moral principle with intuitive appeal. And treating persons with respect typically just means taking their interests into account and recognizing that they are relevantly similar to you. They have the same rational capacities. They have the same hopes and dreams and fears and vulnerabilities as you. And if you recognize that, you realize that, well, you're relevantly similar. So if this is something that I could not universalize for everybody, there's no reason I should grant myself an exception, because they're all relevantly similar to me. So there's a philosophical argument behind it, but also some intuitive appeal. Care ethics, which I consider one of the four dominant ethical theories, it basically says you should, in most cases, prioritize the interest of your loved ones. And who would disagree with, if you have a stranger and your mom drowning in a pool, you should save your mom if you can only save one. That's a pretty straightforward and easy case. But if folks have been a part of the development of who you are, they took care of you when you were vulnerable, you owe them. And it's pretty clear that you owe them. And everybody would agree with that. Virtue ethics, you should practice the virtues and avoid the vices because this is going to lead to a better character. And it's going to be good for you and good for everybody around you. It's going to lead to a consistent lifestyle of moral behavior and good behavior. That seems to be appealing to everyone as well. Sometimes people will briefly pretend to be nihilists and to not accept any of that stuff just to frustrate ethicists, I think. But whenever they reflect about how they actually behave in the world and what they really think, I mean, I would say almost everyone comes around. And you don't have to cash these out in a religious tradition. You can supplement them with fancy philosophical arguments, but they all come back down to just common sense morality, which I think could appeal to anyone.
Yeah, I have to say though, if I'm being critical of this, which sometimes I have, especially in low moments, right? I find that nihilism and like existential dread correlate to eating poorly and sleeping poorly, which you know, I'm not sure what that tells us about the views. But when I have been in those moments, it does strike me that like, okay, well, what we are is stardust, and we have formed in all of these special ways over time based on natural laws. And now here we are animals with this amazing conscious capacity, whether or not consciousness in fact is epiphenomenal. And there's this whole question of whether we're determined to behave the way we do, and our free will is restricted to just a product of cause and effect, which I am pretty, I sort of find that very persuasive. Any sort of libertarian argument for free will, I find confusing. And it is not that hard to go from those claims and the way we got here to think that an extra metaphysical set of rules that determine rightness and wrongness probably don't exist. And what we're really doing is muddling through in an imperfect way. And like ethical disputes are some product of evolutionary processes.
Seems
That
to be related
feels
related to our
intuitive.
seems to be related to our nature for sure, the type of
Mhm.
creatures that we are. And I think it's different to say that it's just a product of evolution that seems to devalue it than to say that it is definitely tied back to our natures, back to our capacities, our needs, our shared vulnerabilities. If you take the deterministic perspective and you deny any substantive free will, that would be problematic for moral responsibility. So I agree. I avoid that topic because it's depressing. I need to read more about determinism and free will and all that. But if you assume
Sure.
if you assume for the sake of argument that we do have free will, we do have some that does give us responsibility for our actions. Um, Even if there's not a set book of here are the actual laws out there, just waiting to be discovered, I think it is the case that we could work together to think through what would be the appropriate rules to govern our behavior and what we should do in certain situations based on the fact that we do have these shared capacities and we do have these shared vulnerabilities. I mean, even if it's the case that the the universe existed for billions and billions of years before us, and it's going to exist for billions and billions of years after us. And we just have this little tiny sliver of time here on this planet, and our existence is not going to mean anything in just a few years. It's still the case that it means everything to you, and it means everything to me, and it means everything to all my fellow human beings. And so, since we're all possibly in this same predicament, and since we all just happen to wake up one day and be born into it, to be raised into what it means to be a human being, and we know how important it is to us, I think that can give it a great deal of meaning. And I think reflection on the type of creatures that we are, and the capacities and the vulnerabilities and the desires and the dreads and the fears that we have, can help us articulate what the morally right things to do are, even if at the end of the day we concede that maybe it doesn't matter that much. Maybe if we're just this tiny speck and the universe is infinitely huge, it still means everything to us. And the fact that we're emotional creatures, I think, does generate these obligations
Mhm.
with all that, all the rest of that taken for granted. I think we can still do ethics, and we can still do it in a serious, meaningful way that can compel action, that can motivate just by reflection on the fact that we are in the same boat.
Nice. I love it. It's very life affirming, and I think accurate as well. Let's talk artificial intelligence. There's a good section in your book, and I really appreciate that you basically do a deep or a pretty good introductory section about AI ethics, which is a huge thing that obviously I can't imagine being an ethicist alive today and not thinking and worrying about this. Like,
Right.
it seems like
Right.
every day you're hearing news and people prognosticating like 50% job replacement in the next like 18 months. I think the head of Microsoft just said that, Microsoft AI development. Who knows whether we trust those people or whether they're trying to hype their products.
Right.
But
Right.
outside of the normal range of just job loss and and sort of social effects, there's the fundamental alignment problem and the superintelligence problem, such that if you create a machine that has any goal and is super intelligent, you will not be able to restrain it. And it's always going to be desiring like the capacity to achieve its goals, which means access to resources and capacity to manipulate people's wills. So once you create this thing, this is the latest book by Yudkowsky, if anyone builds it, everyone dies, basically sets out this thesis that you talk about in your book. So starting with the really big topic of AI ethics, what are you most worried about? Do you think that those doomer scenarios are something that we should genuinely be concerned about?
I think we should definitely genuinely be concerned with that. I'm afraid it's going to come regardless. I think it's the case that, and others have argued this, that we can see that if there were a super artificial intelligence that was so powerful and so much smarter than us that we wouldn't know what it's doing, and it could manipulate matter, and it could, people always say at the last minute, if it's being malicious, just pull the plug. Look, it's going to have control of robots and power grids and whatnot. So I don't want to be alarmist or a doomsday predictor. I don't think that's necessarily the case, but I do think it's very dangerous. I think there's a huge risk that super artificial intelligences could either facilitate earthly utopia or enslave or destroy us all. So it could go in different directions. And you mentioned the alignment problem and the containment problem, and the problem that if a super artificial intelligence has the ability to adjust and modify and improve its own code, at some point it's going to get so good at that you hear this whooshing sound as its intelligence just takes off and leaves us behind. And then how are we supposed to control it? And at which point we'll just have to simply trust that it'll be benign or benevolent towards us and not be malicious. Um, but if something were that smart, its intelligence compared to ours would be similar to ours to a mouse. And how do we treat mice? Do we care too much how much mice are treated? No, no, we treat them as pests. We kill them. I've got a mouse trap in my garage. We use them for scientific experiments. If I'm going to build a new house or go for a bicycle ride, I don't concern myself with how the mice will be impacted. But there is a debate within the philosophical community as to whether or not super artificial intelligence would be neo-Humean or neo-Kantian. So Kant thought that morality was aligned with rationality, and the more intelligent that you are, the more capacity you have to see what the right thing to do is, and the more inclined you are to do it. And Hume thought that reason is just a slave of the passions. And so if Kant is right, then we could expect a super artificial intelligence to be especially mindful and to be especially careful with the way that sentient beings are treated. Now, it may have reason to not do everything that we ask it to do, and maybe that's a good thing. Maybe humans are going to ask super artificial intelligence to do things that they shouldn't do, engage in wars and create biological weapons and whatnot that would cause a lot of suffering. But if it's the case that Kant was right, then maybe we'll be okay. Maybe we'll be just fine. If Hume was right, maybe it'll be selfish and torture us and get rid of us. I don't know whether that is the case, that it's going to become super powerful like this. Some people have argued that the large language models in particular have their limits, and they're ultimately just fancy chatbots. They're just doing predictive text. From my own interactions with using AI, I've seen it become increasingly powerful, more nuanced, more intelligent. I was reading an article this morning in the New York Times how this gentleman that was a software developer, stuff that would used to take him and a team of folks months and would cost $300,000, he does on his subway ride home with this new subscription that he has. So it is dangerous. It's something that ethicists should be thinking about. Interestingly, it's something that philosophers have been thinking about for quite some time in the past. I mentioned David Chalmers' article on the singularity, and cool that he was doing that back in 2018 or 16 or something like that, quite some time before ChatGPT came out. But he anticipated, and others anticipated this alignment problem, whether or not its values would align with our values, and also the containment problem, where you're not going to be able to contain it. Trying to design systems that would keep a super artificial intelligence contained would be like kindergartners trying to build a prison that would keep us contained. Even if it seemed to be physically sound, we could probably burn our ways out of it eventually, or we could just simply manipulate our captors and get out. So it's definitely a big problem. But it also has a lot of promise. I think there's going to be, of course, a lot of scientific breakthroughs, medical breakthroughs. Humans will become far more productive. There's also going to be huge disruptions in the economy, huge disruptions in the workforce. A lot of people are going to become largely obsolete with their existing skill sets. And this presents some opportunities for political philosophers to revisit the old political philosophies and ask themselves, well, in an age of abundance of this sort, what would be the best way to allocate resources? Would some sort of a universal basic income be the best solution? Is it the case that the Marxist utopia is now going to be facilitated impossible? He thought you had the automatic progression of history where capitalism is going to develop that foundation for the means of production, and then it would provide this abundance. I'm sure he didn't think anything at all about artificial intelligence, but if the machines can indeed provide this overabundance, then the question is, do we allow a minority to hoard this and hoard all that power? Or would we expect that all of humanity to be able to share in it and have more free time? It's a difficult, scary time for sure. I thank you for raising this so I could pontificate just a little bit. But what do you think of it? Do you think it's something that we're thinking enough about, that it is indeed scary? Is it overblown, overhyped?
I don't think it's overblown or overhyped. I don't think we're thinking enough about it. We're just racing forward. Obviously, it's an arms race. And with any arms race, there's just always this argument that, well, if we don't do it, they're going to do it. And given the way our nations are currently structured and the winner take all mentality and the reality, I suppose, of hegemony throughout history and the way humans tend to work when they get more power, they exercise it. It just means that I can't see us ever slowing down. And the financial gains are so great. I mean, half of our stock market right now, all of the stock market growth of the last 5 years is built on AI endeavors. So I don't think we're going to slow down. I think that there is some percentage chance that we end up in some crazy world with an alignment problem, and we all just like die from nanobots in the brain all of a sudden exploding because that was
Yeah,
the will. That's a
yeah,
serious risk. But more likely, and that sort of is so science fiction-y and impossible to deal with and impossible to solve, that I almost just try not to think about it on a daily basis. But the more pragmatic questions of like, what are we going to do about education? What are we going to do about, yeah, like you say, when people lose their jobs, will we introduce a UBI? Those kind of questions are more salient because they're things that we can actually potentially deal with.
right.
And I suppose on that front, we could transition a little bit to the education question. So,
Okay.
like, I work in education a lot. I coach a lot of students. I have a fair share of students come to me every week, and they are suddenly much more eloquent than they were the week before. And they've written something that has no grammatical mistakes. And strangely, M dashes covering their work. It's unbelievable. They suddenly develop this capacity, and they tell me, no, Archie, no, I didn't use GPT. I swear I didn't use DeepSeek. I swear. And I go, that's fine. That's fine. Just share your screen, put up the text that you wrote, and I just want you to write it out again. Just type out the text that you gave me for homework beneath the paragraph that you wrote. And they start typing and they get to the M dash, and I can't make an M dash on my computer right now. I wouldn't know how. I do
I
hyphens in a
can.
different way. You know
I
how?
can.
What is
Yeah,
it? Shift.
you do
Go on.
the two little dashes, and then
Yeah.
you type another letter past it and push the space bar. I know because I got the habit of using M dashes way back when I was an undergrad. I read a book called Understanding Power by Noam Chomsky, and it was just a collection of lots of different lectures that he gave, and
Yeah.
all throughout that book, M dashes. And I thought, man, this is a cool way to break off parentheticals. So it's like two small dashes, and then you have to put another letter on the other side and just push the space bar, or whatever word you type after it. Once you hit the space bar, it'll expand it until the M. And there's a difference between an
Mm.
M and an N, but I know that it has been flagged that Chat GPT loves those things. I'm a M dash OG, but yeah, you're right.
You are.
That's a telltale sign. And that's brilliant to ask the students to type that in and reproduce it, and they can't do that. Oh man, it's got to be so awkward and
But
embarrassing for both sides.
yeah. And I don't want to embarrass my students, obviously, but I do need them to recognize, because I think
Yeah,
this is my biggest problem with GPT for students is, and sort of my general take on it, is that it's incredibly useful if you know what you're looking for and you already have the knowledge. And
yeah,
also, if you have enough knowledge to know how to learn something, it can be really useful. but students don't know properly how to learn because they don't know how to teach yet. So they don't know like what kind of process they would have to go through with a GPT to effectively learn from it. And they end up just producing content that they don't fully understand. And then they think that's their day is done. I think this is really worrying for education. And I do not get the feeling that schools are properly addressing it. And like,
No,
I'm
no.
pretty sure about 50% of assignments right now are probably being done mostly
Oh
through
yeah.
AI.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
So,
I watched the transformation. I teach asynchronously online for a university in te Texas, and I've been doing it for 10 years. And I remember a point where all of a sudden the weekly reflections of discussion posts just became super eloquent. What the heck is this? Wow, man, I'm doing a great job. I'm such a good professor. I can't believe how did what have I changed to make them so eloquent? And then I realized, oh man. But I think you know the answer. I think educators know the answer, but they're just not accepting it. I think administrators know the answer. They just don't want to accept it. And that answer is take home graded assignments are dead. They're done.
mm,
I
mm,
don't think you can, I mean, the reliability of any graded assignment that's completed outside of the classroom, and that's very sad, but
mm,
at this point, it can pass the bar exam, it could pass the med school exams. I know it can take my basic intro to ethics or intro to philosophy class exam. Any paper that's submitted, unless they've written it right there in front of you. And I feel really bad for English professors and English teachers in particular because that's their whole thing is writing. And now no one wants to write. They're losing the craft and the skill and the art of writing because these machines will do it for them. And also they're grading. I suppose they've always had a very intensive workload when it comes to grading to read each paragraph and give all that thoughtful detailed feedback. As a philosopher, I'm providing some writing feedback, but really it's about the argument in general. But for teachers of English, they're going to have students write the stuff by hand in front of them in the classroom. Um, One solution is the so-called flipped classroom, and this is something that I've used in my classes, and that's where you have your lecture instruction recorded, and you have
mm,
the students do the reading and watch your lecture and do some pre-exercises. But whenever they come to the class, now it's time for the hands-on work. Now it's time for the actual quiz, the actual exercise, what's graded. And so now the expectation is they're going to do a lot of independent learning beforehand, but the evaluation
mm.
has to happen in front of you. And there's probably going to be a resurgence in oral exams, and it's going to be difficult for educators because that's very labor intensive oral exams, and it was a lot easier to take a look at the stuff that was simply written beforehand. The multiple choice tests that grade themselves, those are great, but they may be dead. Testing centers could also be another solution for asynchronous online classes. You could have all the instruction online. That still works. It's still viable. But for the actual testing, they're probably going to need to come into a physical testing center. One of the colleges where I teach right now, they introduced some new virtual testing proctor. And I looked it up to see how I could possibly use it in my asynchronous online classes on YouTube. And the first thing, and the second thing, and the third thing, and the 12th thing that came up was how to cheat using this particular software. And the way this proctor works is you have to turn on your webcam, and then you take your computer, your laptop, and you turn it 360 degrees to show all your surroundings to prove to the proctor that you're not cheating. And all it was people showing, look, here's how I put the notes on my screen. I've actually got on the computer screen so that they couldn't see those notes. Or I've got them hidden over here. I've got an earbud, and I've got a cell phone that's actually able to read the test question and give me the answer. That's some of these cheating methods could be used inside a testing center as well, but it's so tempting outside of the testing center, and students are pressed for time, and they're intimidated and they're overwhelmed. And and I'm certainly not perfect. Whenever I complain as an educator about this doesn't mean that I'm doing it from a perspective of moral purity, that I've never been tempted to do anything wrong as a student. Sure, I was tempted. I was a kid. Um, so I understand, but at the same time, we have to combat that. I think the outside of the classroom graded work is pretty much dead. Maybe not, but
Yeah, yeah, totally. Well, what about in the case of an ethics bowl? So do you think students should be using it? And if so, how?
yeah, I do. I do for preparation. And whenever I wrote an article or wrote a chapter in the book about how you could use ChatGPT and other sources of AI. I really hadn't reflected on the environmental impact. Hadn't reflected on how, in many cases, the data sets that the large language models have accessed came from authors and from sources that didn't necessarily consent to this. So that's something that I didn't even think about when I was writing the chapter. I should have. I thought more about the alignment problem and more about the containment problem and how this was a risk for Ethics Bowl and how it could also be used as a benefit for Ethics Bowl. But I just wanted to acknowledge that there are some possible issues with using it. But assuming that it could be used ethically in general, I think teams should definitely use it as a generator of possible judge questions. I think teams should definitely use it as, after they fought through the case on their own, as possibly a generator of what another team might say that they could then respond to. Um, I think a team could be very lazy and they could get a case set and say, here it is in PDF, here it is in digital form. Please produce a script for our initial presentation on all these cases. And here's how we would like to use. Here's the ethical theories that we like best, and just give us a script. And an unscrupulous team could then take that script and memorize it and then show up to the competition and regurgitate it. They could tweak their answer based on the actual prompt that's asked at the competition and then regurgitate it. Now, a team that did this would be embarrassingly exposed during the other team's commentary, where they have to actually respond to live questions, and very much so during the judge Q&A. So you're going to have a 10-minute period in Ethics Bowl in most cases where the different judges are going to ask you direct questions. And if you've been a team that's simply memorized and regurgitated a script from ChatGPT, or for that matter, from a coach, you could, of course, have a human coach that just simply tells you what to go say. And if they've not prepared you to think on your feet and to think through it from your own perspective, you could be equally weak. But I think teams could definitely use it to expand their understanding of the cases, to challenge their views. And I don't think there's too much wrong with that if using AI in general is okay.
Yeah. Okay. Interesting. In that case, do you still have enough time for us to read through a case and do a quick bit of analysis on it?
Yeah. If you do, I'd be very happy to.
And so, funnily enough, the main character is Ella Stapleton. My last name, Stapleton. Bizarre. No relation to me, of course. Okay, so Ella Stapleton, a senior at Northeastern University, was shocked when she discovered her professor had used ChatGPT to generate lecture notes for a class in organizational behavior. The notes, shared by the university's online platform, contained awkward phrasing and bizarre images, leading Ella to recognize the telltale signs of generative artificial intelligence use. Her syllabus forbade students from using Gen AI without permission, so Ella found it troubling that her professor appeared to violate the same policy. She filed a formal complaint with the university and requested a partial refund of her tuition. Ella's not alone. Across the country, students have begun to push back against professors who rely on Gen AI tools like ChatGPT to create slide decks, answer questions, and most controversially, grade assignments. One student discovered her anthropology professor had copied and pasted her paper into ChatGPT and used the tool to generate comments and assign a grade. The professor accidentally left the full exchange with the chatbot visible in the gradebook. Though the professor claimed to have read the paper first, the student felt hurt and devalued. Some students argue that using Gen AI in this way is hypocritical, especially at institutions where they are forbidden to do the same. Others emphasize the cost. If students are paying thousands of dollars to be taught by humans, it seems unfair for their professors to outsource part of that work to free software. Professors counter that Gen AI tools help them manage large course loads and free up time for more meaningful interactions like office hours or mentoring. They compare the tools to calculators or spell check, useful assistants, but not substitutes for judgment or expertise. Faculty members are divided on best practices. Some say transparency is essential. Students should be told when and how Gen AI is used. Others fear that disclosure would create unnecessary distrust. Meanwhile, universities are scrambling to craft coherent Gen AI policies that balance innovation with integrity. As its use becomes more widespread, a new set of questions has emerged. What is the proper role of artificial intelligence in teaching and learning? Can a Gen AI comment ever truly replace a teacher's thoughtful feedback? And does using Gen AI in grading compromise fairness, honesty, or the teacher-student relationship? So, big case, very interesting subject matter, very timely, obviously. How would you go about helping a high school team who has read this for the first time? Let's say they have no experience in the ethics bowl. They've had a little introduction about the structure of the competition. They know they've got to present a 5-minute case. Maybe they've looked at the judging criteria, which is obviously going to be linked in the chat for people to go and look at. Where do you start the conversation? How do you guide them?
I would ask them to develop a case summary matrix. So it's a fancy name. It just means a basic table where you're going to have some basic elements that you want to provide in your initial presentation. And so if you look at the judge's score sheet, in most cases, they're going to be asked to evaluate that initial presentation according to whether or not the presentation was clear and coherent, to the extent that the team engaged and considered the central moral dimensions, and also if they proactively responded to an objection, or at least took into account how a reasonable critic might disagree with them. And so I would advise a team to first get clear on the basic facts. A lot of stuff was in there. You need to get 3 or 4 paragraphs of content. At least it's only a page, but still it's a lot of stuff. Ask yourself, what were the basic facts? In this particular case, well, you had a couple of different students who had experiences with professors. In one case, the professor had forbade their students from using AI at all, and the instructor had used AI to grade their students' work. And I think in another case, they just used it for their lecture preparation, perhaps. Um, and so those could be the basic details. And then when you move over to the central moral dimensions, well, ask yourself, why is this an ethics bowl case? Why is this an ethics Olympiad case? Case writers don't publish cases with clear answers. They never release a case where it's obvious what should be done. There's always going to be several different sides to the story, several different perspectives. Usually they're going to be legitimate moral values that are in tension with one another that you're going to have to balance. It's not going to be obvious one way or the other. And here you've got the educators saying, look, this makes us more efficient, more productive, allows us to possibly be more effective, to get more done, and to focus where our labor can be best utilized for the students' benefit. And then you have the students saying, well, look, this is hypocritical to prevent us from using it whatsoever for you to use it. Also, I would like some feedback from an actual expert and not a chat bot. And this seems to be a waste of my tuition. I could just simply go straight to AI if that's all I'm going to get. And so you've got those as the primary central moral values. And then beyond that, then you can start to ask the question, well, what do you guys initially think about this? What are your initial thoughts? So what's the team's view at the moment? If I had to put you on the spot and say, do you think it's okay or not okay? In what circumstances? What would be your perspective? And now from the team, you're going to get a variety of responses. And so if you're thinking about this from the perspective of a participant, expect the person beside you to say something slightly different from what you're thinking, but expect them to also value what you have to say because you've just read the case for the first time. Maybe you've thought about the issue generally, but you're just now having to actually work up a perspective. And so whatever they say, listen to them, take it seriously, and then share your thoughts and then reflect on that a bit. And then another person will jump in. And over a bit of time, you should come to an initial view that the team can share, can get behind. Now, maybe everybody's not 100%. That's completely fine. It's a brand new case. You're just getting your initial perspective. Well, now the coach or one of the team members should ask, well, how could a reasonable person disagree with us? And maybe we've already disagreed internally, and so it's not going to take a whole lot of creativity to figure out. But if this were our position, how could a person take that seriously, but then also disagree? And how could we respond to them? And while you're doing this, there should be someone that's writing it down on a whiteboard. I've had teams do that, or just simply recording it on the computer. And if you have a projector, you could share it. That way, folks can see that what they're saying is being taken seriously. And once you're done, you're going to have all of the elements that you're going to need to provide that presentation at the beginning of an ethics Olympiad or ethics bowl round. You're going to have the basic details where you can show mastery of the details of the case and affirm for the judges that you know what's going on. That helps make it clear and systematic. You're going to have the central moral dimensions laid out. These are the values and tension. This is what we had to balance in deriving our view. That's going to be the central moral dimensions on the score sheet. And then you're going to have your actual perspective, the position that you're going to defend, and you're going to have to tweak that perspective at the competition based on the actual question asked, but it's going to be related to it. And so you can bring your answer back to your initial view or the view that you developed over the course of the season. And then you're going to have that proactive response to an objection. And if you do this for all of the cases, you're going to have a nice, neat table with these summarized perspectives on every case that you can use as possibly a shared document to work with your team to revise over the course of the season and to print out right before the competition and take to the competition. That way you can remind yourself that morning you're in the car or during lunch. Here are the different cases that we've not covered yet. Here are our perspectives on those. Do we have any weak points, etc. So that's the way I would coach how to think through a case. That's the way I do coach thinking through cases. I just did it last season for both a high school team and an intercollegiate team, and it worked quite well.
Awesome. Okay, really clear. Then that leads to this critical question, which is what role do the formal ethical theories play in these cases? Because I notice there isn't a section there where you're like, we're going to explicitly reference whether we're approaching the case from a utilitarian perspective or, or a subset of utilitarianism, a preference act utilitarian perspective, all of these potential theoretical components. You wrote a book about this, of course, about these metaethical theories. So you must think that they're important to consider, do you think they should be explicitly referenced and explained in an Olympiad round or an ethics bowl round?
There's been a long-standing discussion within the Ethics Bowl and the Ethics Olympiad community as to what role these ethical theories should play. And I tend to land on the side of it's Ethics Bowl, not Theory Bowl. And
Mm,
so sometimes judges, they'll want to hear what is the framework that you're using? Is it from a Kantian perspective? Is it from a utilitarian perspective? And they'll want to be reassured that you know exactly how that ethical theory works, its philosophical underpinnings, its weaknesses, and they'll want to see it applied to a case in a very accurate, defendable manner. On the other side, you just want people to make a clear moral argument that makes common sense. And while it'll incorporate elements of deontology, it'll incorporate elements of treating persons with respect, it will incorporate elements of rational consistency, of maximizing pleasure, of paying attention to the consequences, of prioritizing the interests of loved ones. There's no need to actually reference those ethical theories. And I also think that it would really unnecessarily and artificially constrain a team's analysis if they were to simply say, look, we're Kantians, that's it. Everything we do is going to be from a Kantian perspective. We're utilitarians, that's it. All these ethical theories have their limits. They all have their weaknesses. I'm not sure why a team would decide to limit themselves in that way. And also, the details of the cases always seem to be so complicated, complex, and nuanced that you're going to leave out a lot of important pieces of the puzzle if you only look at it from a particular lens. Uh, and so sometimes with teams, I'll talk about the ethical theories. But this past season, for my college students, two-thirds of the team was in my ethics class, so they were getting the ethical theories from me directly. The rest of the team was taking another professor's class, and so they were getting them from that perspective. And so I might have referenced the ethical theories occasionally, but for the most part, we just thought through it in the way that I mentioned a second ago. For my high school team, this was a group that I did not have in class. They were coming together for this extracurricular activity once a week for an hour on Fridays. And so I tended more to use multimedia to show videos of relevant clips of stuff that was related back to the class and just have them get their thoughts on the table as to what seems intuitively wrong about this case, what seems to be the intuitive answer, and how does that contrast with others' moral tuitions and initial thoughts. So the way that I coach, and it's not necessarily the best way to coach, and it's certainly not the only way to coach, is I don't typically enforce the utilization of the ethical theories. If folks want to do that, it's cool. I
mm,
had some different experiences at the competition. When I took my team to Chicago for an intercollegiate ethics bowl competition, there were in most rounds either the other team or a judge asked my team, "What ethical theory are you using? What's your
mm,
framework?" And they really wanted to see that, and it hurt us in terms of the judges' score sheets. And I found this frustrating because I've been on the side of it's not theory bowl, but some folks really wanted to see that. And the intercollegiate competition was before the high school competition. So I reached out to the high
mm,
school folks and said, look, I just had a bad experience driving all the way to Chicago and not having that external validation on the score sheets because I told my teams, it's not theory bowl. We don't have to have these ethical theories as long as you have a good argument. Is the same, should we expect the same? And if so, that's fine. I just want to clarify. And they said, no, it's not theory bowl, it's ethics bowl.
mm,
So and so when we went to the high school competition, we fared much better on the judges' score sheets. In fact, we came in second place, took the runners up cup.
mm. It's so interesting because I suppose if you were gonna craft a team from scratch and you had 10 hours a week with them, you had, or like, let's just say you had 30 hours with them before a tournament. And for our tournaments, they're only 8 hours. Would you want them to have the grounding and then decide whether or not to use it in a round of ethical theories? Because then if another team engages with it, and especially if they end up explaining the second formulation wrong, it would be an ideal scenario, I would think, to have a team who could engage on that normative ethical level and be able to express why
Yeah.
actually that's not how the formulation quite works, like, and be able to explain that. Would you sort of agree with that, even though that's not necessary to engage in a bowl?
If I had 10 hours a week, yeah. And thinking back to the high school preparation, I did have them watch some stuff on the ethical theories. Crash Course Philosophy does a really good job,
It's
the
awesome.
YouTube videos. And I actually had them watch stuff on utilitarianism, stuff on Kantianism. I guess I did over a couple of practices expose my team to that. We talked about it a little bit, but then we certainly did not force it onto the cases. And I didn't force it onto the cases with the college team either. But my practice time with the college team was also limited. It was just an hour for once a week. I mean, they were in my class, they were in another ethics class. But and as we got closer to the competition, we met a couple additional times. But if I had 10 hours a week, Yeah. If I had all that time, if I still only had
Sure.
a dozen or 15 cases, and I know in many cases these teams do have that luxury. There are high schools that have devoted ethics classes, and if you're incorporating ethics bowl along with that, oh yeah, sure. There's so much to explore, and you could be
Yeah.
a super fantastic team. But if you don't have all that time, I think if you focus on the ethical theories, it's going to be an unnecessary
Not the
constraint.
waters.
And I
Yeah.
and I I was kind of convinced by this by Matthew Wills, fantastic guy that does Ethics Olympiad. He's brought me in to provide some trainings for athletes or athletes for Ethics Olympiad, and he said Matt, if you teach the ethical theories, and I want you to try not to use their names with the younger
Yeah.
groups in particular. With older groups, it's fine, but with the middle school, the teenagers and below, especially the young kids, 10 and below, don't talk about Kantianism because their eyes are just going to glaze over. They're going to feel like they can't do it at all. Instead, talk about rational consistency, treating persons with respect, consequences in general. And so I did this. I developed some PowerPoint presentations, or rather than using Kant, I would just have, and not even deontology. And sometimes I
Mm.
wouldn't even talk about rational consistency. I would just intuitively think through a case with them and help them uncover that underlying commitment to treating like cases alike or persons with respect because I
Yeah.
think they can be barriers in many cases. And with high school students that have never been exposed to philosophical ethics, philosophy, any of that, it would just scare them away. I want to make it
Yeah.
accessible and appealing and for it to resonate, to not be something that's intimidating, but something that's
Mhm.
welcoming.
Totally. Okay, well then on this case, what do you think? Do you think that it's wrong for a professor to use AI? I will say I as with most of these cases, I think that it's very, very case dependent, and there probably isn't a universal answer. And a professor you not reading a paper and then grading someone's essay with it and just using that as a grading system is like a total abnegation of their responsibility and obviously wrong. But a professor using it to develop an example of something they know they're looking for already, or develop a game or like a classroom learning tool, it doesn't seem like a problem to me. Or formatting a document as like a word search, like imagine that. Like that's a good example. Something that would take you 2 hours and take GPT 25 seconds, and it will assist learning. It feels like it really depends on what the professor's doing. But what do you think?
Yeah, we're on the same page there. So in terms of assignment development, lecture preparation, I have used AI to develop a word search. I didn't use ChatGPT. I just used some sort of an online generator, and I
Mhm.
used it as an extra credit assignment on one of my ethics and my intro to philosophy class exams. So we had this word find, and look here's all these terms from philosophical ethics. Please put this into a find thing. And then for each one they find, it's going to be a bonus point, and then they're going to choose three of these and write a short answer on it. And so, my goodness, for me to sit down and try to figure out how to put those letters in there, that would be ridiculous. And also, since it's an area that I'm already an expert, I can go to AI and say, look, I'm going to teach a class in this particular topic. Can you suggest some exercises that I could use to be interactive? And when I do this, usually I'll get back a dozen ideas, of which one or two actually align with my teaching style and what I know about the students and the time that I have and the goals that I have. But by having those 10 or 12 different examples, it allows me to pick which would be best. And I could, of course, call my buddies. I could say, hey, Dr. Lewis. Hey, Dr. Pandolfi. Hey, Dr. Bach. I'm teaching this class on such and such. What would be a good exercise to use? I'm not sure what the difference would be since I'm already an expert between calling one of those folks or typing up a prompt on AI since I'm the expert. Now, if it was an area where I was not an expert, we know that AI at this point is prone to hallucinations, which just means passing off incorrect information as obviously true. And in many cases, it's overconfident. Yeah, this is exactly what the person said, or this is how the concept works. It's wrong. And it tries to convince you that it's right. I would be very reluctant to trust it to teach outside of my area of expertise. For that reason, I need to have my due diligence where I go and actually do the research, look at the primary sources, talk to actual experts. But if it's an area that I'm in which I'm already an expert and I'm just bolstering my teaching abilities, that seems to be a wonderful use of AI. I would agree that turning over the grading to AI is going to be disingenuous to the students. When I discussed this case with my high school team, they had that emotional response that if I put the time and effort into writing a paper and I go back and I revise it, I'm really trying to make it a quality piece of writing. It's an insult to then have a bot spit out a grade and spit out feedback. I
Mm.
expect that teacher on the other end, I expect them to uphold their end of the relationship. And they spoke in terms of relationship and how they would feel hurt if it was just simply a bot. So they want a consciousness on the other end of the equation. They want an actual human being evaluating
Mm,
it, experiencing it, and then using their wisdom and their experience to provide that feedback. Now
mm,
we did talk about maybe in the future if it could be shown that AI actually does an equal job or a superior job to human educators. Would we then be more comfortable turning over some of the evaluation to the AI? And they said, yeah, especially if the educator were transparent. So if they knew what they were getting into, and there wasn't the deception or yeah, just the lack of the transparency there, then that would be completely fine if it could do a better job. But until then,
yeah.
they get that feedback from persons. It's a matter of not being hypocritical, also being transparent. And I think that educators that have a no AI usage policy, they're being unreasonable, and
Mm,
your students are just learning to ignore you. Your students are
yeah.
learning to dismiss your instruction because
Yeah.
it's readily available. I mean, there's a case to be made in political philosophy or the philosophy of law that if you have certain laws that the public is just simply ignoring, you need to change those laws because they're getting in the habit of ignoring the state's authority. And so if it's completely unreasonable, don't even try to enforce it because
Mm,
you're going to have a revolt. You're undermining your legitimacy, and that's certainly going to happen in the classroom as well. So I've been there. There was a time when I tried to ignore AI. I thought if I don't talk about it, maybe they won't know about it. If I bring it up, then the students who don't know about it do. But then I realized
yeah.
they're all using it. A whole bunch of them are. So I need to give them some proactive guidance on how to use
Yeah.
AI ethically in your ethics class, which I do.
Good, good. Yeah. So we run something called the Global AI Debates, which is sort of an
Oh
essay
yeah,
competition, and
yeah, I'm
it's
familiar.
it's all about these topics specifically. And we had the policy exactly along those lines. Look, use it, just use it. There's no way we could stop you using it, but if you hand in an essay that's like clearly GPT, the judge is going to clock onto that. We're all, we're hiring very intelligent judges who are in this field. They're going to see like a lack of human input, and they're going to judge you accordingly. And then when you get to the live rounds at the end of it, where you have to speak in front of the judge and you're going to be asked questions, it's all going to fall apart, just like we were talking about with the ethics bowl. And I was amazed to see the John Locke essay competition, which is another one of the biggest philosophy essay competitions for high school students. They just changed their policy as well, which is exactly what we just said. Um,
Uh,
and yet I had a judge or someone who I wanted to judge for our competition. I reached out to them and said, would you mind, like, do you want to be a judge for this? And they said, I'm find the whole AI use antithetical. And so I don't want to be a part of it. So
hmm.
it does definitely raise, yeah, it's a complicated ethical question for sure. Um,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
yeah, just gonna, agree with you that if you can't enforce a rule and then you
Yeah.
just, what's the point of having it? Yeah. Hmm.
But I think you're gonna need to have those sorts of checks where they're going to have live interaction. One idea in Ethics Bowl is to diminish the value of the initial presentation and to expand the value of the commentary and commentary response and judge Q&A,
Yeah.
because those are things that the teams are going to actually be showing and confirming that they really know what they're talking about. Whereas that initial presentation, if that were overly weighted, that's the type of thing that they could regurgitate a script. But I
Yeah.
also think it's the case, and I should have said this earlier, that the type of student that Ethics Olympiad and Ethics Bowl attracts is going to be far less likely to simply turn to a chatbot. It's always a voluntary activity. They know it's about
Yeah.
morality and ethics. They know it's different than traditional debate, or they should, or they'll learn quickly. These aren't the kind of participants are going to be inclined to go do something that they know is unethical. So I think it polices itself often in that context. But having a round where you have to actually talk about it live, that's going to mean more and more. My son, he applied for various scholarships to college, and I've noticed that some of them have moved away from essays and they've moved toward videos. At the University of Tennessee, you had to record like a 5-minute video. And a person could read a script, but I think to the extent that they appear to be speaking extemporaneously and from the heart, they're going to be a lot more credible. But institutions have already understood that you can't just simply take in written stuff at this point because you're not sure of the source. And I know that there are chatbots out there that can write in more of a human tone, and you can make tweaks. And I suspect it's the case you can ask it to make grammatical and spelling errors. I never thought I'd get to the point where I preferred responses that had errors in them over those that were fully polished. But I do because I respect the fact that that was a real human that did it. On the other side, I can't know for sure, but when I get it, there's some things screwed up. But then I still can't know at this point because I know that there are also chatbots that can game that, unfortunately.
Yeah, yeah, it's so tough. Very good. Look, we're coming on to an hour and a half. I want to open the floor. Is there anything else you want to say, talk about? As I say, I'll give an introduction to the fantastic book, and thank you so much for quoting me in it, and just doing such a thorough job of like talking to so many people involved in the ethics bowl throughout its history, and giving, I think, the first like really comprehensive account of all of these ethical questions and processes and how the competition works. Is just a very impressive feat. So thank you for contributing to the Ethics Bowl in this way and through all the other things you've done.
Thank you. Thank you. It's my honor and pleasure. Part of the book was the purpose of the book was to honor all the folks, or many of the folks that have been involved for so many years. They do a lot of work that it's thanked, but it's not thanked nearly enough. And the world doesn't know nearly enough about Ethics Bowl and Ethics Olympiad. And so I wanted to get those quotes and weave them into the book. I didn't realize how difficult that was going to be on the front end. But when you have that many different voices, that many different perspectives, to weave that into a coherent narrative, oh man, that was a difficult writing project. This is my
Yeah.
sixth book, but it was my most difficult. And that was why I was bringing together all those different quotes. But thank you for affirming that it worked out well, because that was part of the purpose, was to validate what they had done, and to praise it quite a bit, and to get some more exposure for the folks doing that awesome stuff. But one question I had for you is, what's next for TK Ethics? What's next for MPI? What are you guys working on? On the burner?
A lot, a lot. Before and after this conversation, I'm doing a huge amount of outreach. When I hear that you were the outreach director, um, I
Okay.
I sympathize. So a lot of what I do right now is outreach. So in terms of competitions and events, we have the TK Ethics Invitational coming up on the 28th, and that's for the spring topic. We've got 26 teams across Africa, China, Singapore, Australia. I don't think a New Zealand team. We had one last time. Canada, US. I think Mexico's back in it. So like huge international event, super fun.
That's
Um,
the first. That's the first I've heard of Africa and Mexico in an ethics bowl, ethics Olympiad type event, and that's
yeah,
wonderful. I talk about the expansion of the book and how we had one in South Korea. There was one in Iran, I think, but now to hit Africa and Mexico, thank you. That is wonderful.
it's really exciting. And then we're running the European ethics. We're basically doing our Pan American series, which leads into Matthew Wills's international final, starting at the in end of March and start of April, where we're doing the European Ethics Olympiad for all Europe and also including Africa in that and UK schools. Then the Canadian Ethics Olympiad on the 4th and the American one on the 11th. I believe I've got that right. So I'm doing a huge amount of outreach, getting people ready for that and coaching for it. We got a bunch of teams. And also, one thing that I've started doing recently is I'm on Instagram and TikTok now, publishing
Oh,
content
okay.
about this. And that has
Oh,
been surprisingly effective. So I'm trying to post
oh,
like an ethical dilemma a day. And I had one, in fact, related to what you were talking about before. You know, the example you give of saving your mother drowning in the pool? Well, I give
yeah.
one about it's actually, I think it's Bernard Williams's idea. It's a criticism of ethical theories in general, where he says that for any ethical theory, if you're watching two people drowning in front of you and one of them's your wife, and you take even 1 second to consider what
Yeah.
should I do based on an ethical theory, you've made a terrible mistake and you've had
Right.
one thought too many, is his expression. And I posted a video about that. It got like 130,000 views on Instagram, 5,000 people like liked it, and hundreds of comments of ethical discourse, some of it really terrible, some of it really interesting and good and
Wow.
in depth. On the TikTok one, I'm just bragging here. I might not even include this in the thing, but I'm so excited that it's caught on at all. I had a video that got 800,000 views about child moral psychology, 50,000. Like it's just the numbers are
That is
insane.
insane. That is
I know,
fantastic.
and a lot of people commenting because the main video on the TikTok is introducing the ethics bowl. So then when people come to the channel, they look at the first video, they see that, they then like
Wow.
follow through into the whole thing. So
Well,
that's
if you see any snippets from this conversation you'd like to pull and put it in there, but you certainly have my permission. I don't have the
thank
patience
you.
for all that stuff. I used to be
Yeah,
on Facebook and Twitter. It was just so
yeah,
divisive, especially during 2020, the
yeah.
COVID stuff and the
Tough.
politicization of vaccines and masks and the election nonsense. Sorry, I forget it. This is too much of a time vampire, too divisive. But I know it can be a vehicle for all sorts of good and promotion of wonderful stuff like this. So thank you for having the patience and mental fortitude to actually do it and use it for good.
No worries. I'll keep going as long as I can, but we'll see. Yeah. Look, this has been absolutely fantastic. Thank you so much for talking to me. And
Thank you.
yeah, look forward to seeing
Thank
you.
you.
Hopefully we can meet in person at some point. I was just gonna say, like, for the first time.
I'll be in St. Louis next month for the Association for Practical and Professional Ethics annual meeting, presenting on Ethics Bowl of the Rescue, and also judging the Intercollegiate Ethics Bowl National Championship. If you happen to be around St. Louis,
Okay.
and then I'll be in New Orleans at what's that university? My buddy Joel McClellan is a philosophy professor down there in New Orleans, and I think it's at Loyola University, talking to their
Well,
philosophy department about the book as well, and also the political science folks. Are you still up in the Boston area?
cool. Yes, I just got married and moved here full time. So
Oh,
yeah,
okay.
I'm just north of
All
Boston.
right. Well, the next time I'm that way, we'll definitely meet up. Next time you're down this way, please stop.
I'll let you know. Absolutely. Cool. Thank you so much, Matt. We'll talk again soon.
All right, my pleasure, Archie. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks. Bye.